Hello there, New Life Church. This is sort of a rebroadcast, if you will, for the first numbers that we did. We did a live stream on Wednesday, and admittedly, it didn't go real well as far as we kept having had a cancellation of the stream and stuff like that. We had to redo that and so forth, and so it's kind of choppy, and it's only available on Facebook. So this is just kind of a rebroadcast on the first part of numbers, and so I'm going to go ahead and start presenting that now for you, and we'll kind of go through this. One thing I've talked with Pastor about quite a bit was just the idea of I'm going to shorten this up a little bit for you each Wednesday, because I know it's a lot to be watching over the course of that long period of time. We're talking about an hour and 15 minutes or so. So anyway, this is beginning numbers. This is chapter 1 verse through chapter 4, and entitled this order and organization. And so here's what we have. First of all, God is a God of order and preparation, and that's the main theme here today. We would do well to follow this order of his. The passage is Numbers 1:1 through 4:49, and the outline is chapter 1 basically is taking order of inventory. Chapter 2 is order of encampment, and then chapters 3 and 4 is order of ministry. And so as far as the order of inventory is concerned, I'm going to read a little bit here. I'm going to skip a bit, though, because we get into a lot of nitty-gritty here. But then starting in chapter 1, then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the sons of Israel by their families, by their fathers' households, according to the number of names, every male, head by head, from 20 years old and upward, whoever is able to go out to war in Israel. You and Aaron shall number them by their armies. With you, moreover, shall be a man of each tribe, each one head of his father's household. These then are the names of the men who shall stand with you. And it gives the name of the 12 representatives of each tribe of Israel. So Moses and Aaron took these men who had been designated by name, and they assembled all the congregation together on the first of the second month. Then they registered by ancestry in their families, by their fathers' households, according to the number of names, from 20 years old and upward, head by head, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And that's verse 19. So he numbered them in the wilderness of Sinai. And then we go in and we get into the numbers of people and so forth. And this takes us through verse 47, where we continue. The Levites, however, were not numbered among them by their father's tribe, for the Lord had spoken to Moses, saying, only the tribe of Levi you shall not number. You shall not take their census among the sons of Israel, but you shall appoint the Levites over the tabernacle of the testimony, and over all its furnishings, and over all that belongs to it. They shall carry the tabernacle and all its furnishings, and they shall take care of it, and they shall also encamp around the tabernacle. So when the tabernacle is sent out, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle encamps, the Levites shall set it up. But the layman who comes near it shall be put to death. The sons of Israel shall camp, each man by his own camp, and each man by his own standard, according to their according to their armies. But the Levites shall camp around the tabernacle of the testimony, so that there will be no wrath on the congregation of the sons of Israel. So the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. Thus the sons of Israel did, according to all which the Lord had commanded Moses, so they did. So the summary for this is that on the first day, the first order of the day, in terms of preparation, was a personal inventory. Take the sum, and that's what Moses did with the help of the heads of each tribe that were numbered, and they did that. And before even listing the numbers of each tribe, Moses in verse 19 was inspired to say, this is what I did. So in other words, God said this is what I did. In other words, he obeyed. And I don't think that was so much to pat himself on the back, so much as it was, this is a good thing to do. And so as one commentator wrote, if Jehovah's initiative is the first outstanding truth in the opening chapters of Numbers, Moses' obedience is the second. So here, what you have here is you've got kind of where they are with things. And here's a pointer here. Right now they're at Mount Sinai, and they're going to stay here for a while before they end up going into the wilderness of Paran, and then to Kadesh, and then here to Arad, and then to Moab, and so on and so forth. So, question: is there significance to the date? And that first date was mentioned was on the first of the second month in the second year, and yes, there is significance to that date, because on the first day of the second, on the first day of the first month of the second year. So, in other words, exactly 1 month before, in Exodus 40:17, the tabernacle was erected. And the point is that it's important in that it's the same date, but it's not as important as the worship. Worship first, and then we start taking the census. Um, so the initial point, promised land had been mentioned to everyone, but the initial point was getting Moses to Mount Sinai so that in Exodus 19 through 40 he could give the law to the people. So in other words, man's relationship with God was first and foremost before dealing with the promised land. And speaking of the promised land, what was the big deal about the promised land? Well, for nomadic shepherds like the Jews, having a permanent home to call their own was a dream come true. It was a place of rest, because you got to keep in mind they've been moving for literally hundreds of years. Ever since Abraham was called by God, he started moving around, and they were a nomadic tribe. And so this area was also rich in natural resources, and it was a land flowing with milk and honey, as everyone remembers hearing that. And also it was a promise that God made to Abraham, and this was hundreds of years earlier. In Genesis 15:18, it says, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, 'To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt as far as the great river, the river Euphrates.'" And so again, what we're looking at here is we're looking at this outline where we've got, here's the Nile and all the way across here to where the Euphrates is. And then he continues, let's see, God later confirms this in Joshua, where he says, "From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory." So this is kind of like where the setting of the sun is in this area. All right, so all of this. Now, if you compare that to where Israel actually is, Israel is right here. Like modern day Israel is right here. And so, as you can see, God gave the Israelites a lot more land than just what they have right now. So, what's happening? Well, politics get involved, and then there's just the whole idea of has Israel obeyed or not obeyed, and things like that. And of course, Israel isn't exactly known for doing the will of God all the time in the Bible. And so that brings a third reason why the Promised Land is a big deal. Is not only is it a place for nomadic shepherds, and it was also something that was promised from God to Abraham, but it also was in part a judgment on the sinful Canaanites. In Deuteronomy 9:4, God says, "Do not say in your heart when the Lord your God has driven them out before you, because of my righteousness the Lord has brought me to possess the land. But it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you." So in other words, God was saying, don't pat yourself on the back with how much you've done well for me. This is about punishment for these guys. So yes, there's a significance then. So the significance of the Promised Land. The next question is there any significance to the men who were selected to lead the tribes? And yeah, a little bit. In Exodus 18, verses 21 through 26, just kind of paraphrasing that, Jethro comes up to Moses, and Moses is just running himself ragged. And Jethro says, "Look, you can't keep on like this. What you need to do is you're micromanaging everything, every little judgment you are involved with. You don't need to. We've got millions of people here. You've got to delegate. So what I think you should do is you should pick one man from each tribe to be kind of your governor, and let them handle all the little stuff, and then the big stuff still take care of. I think you will find if you do that it will lighten the load for you a little bit, and you'll actually be able to live through all this." And so that's what Moses did. And most of the guys that are named in that passage, which was let's see here, verses 1:4 through 1:16, and you can read that yourself. Those were pretty much the same guys that were listed in Exodus. Why a census? Well, it says to take a census of all the congregation of the sons of Israel and so forth. And it says specifically, number them by their armies, right? So for purposes, this is for purposes of, excuse me, I'm doing this in my living room. So this is for purposes of going into battle. It's who would be able to go to war. So the next step after establishing the war, or excuse me, after establishing the law, is to go to the promised land. But there's going to be a battle for it. In other words, it would not be easy. There's also some spiritual reasons with the census, and there's some metaphors and so forth going on here. But first of all, one of the reasons for the census is to show God's faithfulness to increasing the seed of Abraham. As you'll see, there were several 100,000 men, 20 years and older, who were registered for this. And so when he had taught to Abraham, God had taught to Abraham, who at the time was childless, he said, "I'm going to make your descendants just uncountable." And so, and by uncountable, we don't mean literally infinite, but we mean really, really big number. And so the census was to show just how big that number had gotten in a relatively small amount of time. Hundreds of years was all. I'm not exactly sure how long. I should have looked that up prior to that, but I'm not going to go ahead and take care of that. But it was several hundred years. But only in several hundred years, you're talking about a couple million people from starting with at zero, basically. The second spiritual reason for a census is to see that God numbers his people the way a shepherd does his sheep. And so, but in this case, different than just sheep is he allows us to be part of the process. Is not only was he numbering us, and in other words, saying, I'm taking care of each and every one of you, but in addition to that, he was allowing the Moses and Aaron and the representatives of the 12 tribes to participate in that. And then lastly, we may fail in spiritual battle because we do not take an honest assessment. And if we aren't careful in assessing where we are and taking our own personal census, then we're going to fail in spiritual battle. And that's what we kind of have here is taking account. It gives them an idea of just what we're dealing with. Almost kind of like a budget or something, if you will. So let's see. In addition, here seems like it would take a long time, but in addition, if you go to Exodus 30, verses 11 through 16, the Lord also spoke to Moses, saying, "When you take a census of the tribe of Israel to number them, then each one of them shall give a ransom to himself for the Lord when you number them, so that there will be no plague among them when you number them. This is what everyone who is numbered shall give, half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary, half a shekel as a contribution to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered from 20 years old and over shall give it as a contribution to the Lord. The rich shall not pay more and the poor shall not pay less than the half shekel when you give the contribution to the Lord to make an atonement for yourselves. You shall take the atonement money from the sons of Israel and give it to the service of the tent of meeting, that it may be a memorial for the sons of Israel before the Lord to make atonement for yourselves." So the last reason for a census was it was kind of a tax, but it wasn't just a tax for bloating the government or anything like that. It was a tax to pay others, and we'll get into who it was paying prior to that, or I'm sorry, later on. And so please note that he said, no matter if you're rich or poor, you are paying that half a shekel. No one is paying more, no one's paying less. In other words, in God's eyes, we all have equal worth. So, seems like it should have taken a long time. All right. And yeah, it might have taken a long time, but if everything were organized, one commentator said it would have taken maybe about a single day. So probably not. Next question. What about the tribes and how are they mentioned in the Bible? Well, if you look at the tribes and how they're mentioned, in this column right here, it's where they are actually mentioned. in this passage of Numbers in 1 verses 1 through 54. You got Reuben and then Simeon and Gad and Judah, Issachar, and so forth. Well, if you compare that to the birth order, it's different. And if you compare it to the populations that they were numbered, it's also different. In other words, the way that they were numbered, the way that they were presented, the numbers didn't bear out. They didn't go from like greatest to least or least to greatest or anything like that. If you look at Judah, who was fourth on how his name appeared in the Bible in chapters 1 through 54, he's actually that tribe has the most number of people. Dan, who's all the way down here, has the second highest number, and so forth. And again, these differ from the birth order. Now, Reuben and Simeon are the same, and Judah's the same, but then it kind of goes crazy. So I looked and I looked and I looked and I couldn't find a reason, why, or any speculation as to why they were named how they were named, but they were just named, which brings us to a good point. God has order, but sometimes he doesn't choose to share that order with us, and that's okay. And so everyone, if you know, everyone was rounded to the nearest 50s. Gad was at 45,650. Otherwise, they're to the nearest hundreds. And the average for each tribe was about 50,300. So that seems like a lot of Israelites, doesn't it? Well, the total is about 603,000. And so it would put the number of total Israelites to about 2 to 3 million, which is a lot. And some have trouble with this being such a large number in such a short amount of time. But there's some theories that put that number of potential troops at maybe 5,500, not the 603,000. And it's based on a Hebrew word, aleph, which in some places in the Bible, it means like a clan or a group, as opposed to the literal 1,000 or 1,000. But in this case, probably not. The aleph is probably thousands by most accounts. So this is the book of Numbers, and I'm a math teacher, and so I couldn't leave well enough alone. And there's this little thing called exponential growth. And with exponential growth, what you see is you get things growing really, really fast. And everyone by now has heard of the curve. We got to flatten the curve. What does that mean? Well, the idea is that when we're trying to flatten the curve, the growth of the coronavirus in a population is not linear. It doesn't go like this. It goes like this, because one person infects, I think they said it was like, I don't know what it is, nine people, something big. One person infects several people, and each of those people then in turn infect that many people. And so you get this thing going like this. And so the idea of flattening the curve was to do this. So it didn't go like this. It was more like this. And so anyway, that's the idea of exponential growth. I got a little video for you that I'll show you here. But anyway, I did a little exponential investigation myself. And if you figure that we're talking about 215 years, which is the time span of when I saw 70 people, some say 75 people, made the trek to Egypt, and then they went out of Egypt. Now, some people would include that to be a total of 430 years. That kind of gets into the thickets, and I don't want to get into that. I'm trying to keep the lowest number possible. So if you say 70 people, 215 years, then is that even possible to get to 2 to 3 million? And the answer is yeah, it is. If each couple had between 7.5 and 9 children, then yeah, you could do it. Now that doesn't factor in deaths, and over 215 years there's going to be deaths, so you're going to raise that up a little bit more. But when you're talking about this tribe, who God said he was going to make a great nation, he's going to bless them with a lot of children. And there's not like there's birth control or Planned Parenthood or anything like that. And in fact, the Israelites view children as a blessing in their culture. So that's not unreasonable. I also kind of looked at it as, what if you start with the 12 men of the 12 tribes of Israel and go to the 600,000 men? Numbers are roughly the same when you're dealing with about 7 or 8 generations. If you want to, there's an article. I didn't include this here, but it gets into the real thickets of this thing. And it's a really good explanation. And also, I mean, if you can go online and go to Adam Clarke, that's Clarke, his commentary, he actually goes through each tribe by tribe and says, well, if they had this many kids and this many kids, this is how we can arrive at this many thousands for each tribe. Again, I'm not going to get into that. All right. But anyway, here is kind of a video on how to on exponential growth. So just watch this, and I will return here in just a moment as you are watching this.
How many times can you fold a piece of paper? Assume that one had a piece of paper that was very fine, like a paper they typically use to print the Bible. In reality, it seems like a piece of silk. To clarify these ideas, let's say you have a paper that's 1,000th of a centimeter in thickness. That is 10 to the power minus 3 centimeters, which equals 0.001 centimeters. Let's also assume that you have a big piece of paper, like a page out of the newspaper. Now, we begin to fold it in half. How many times do you think it could be folded like that? And another question. If you could fold the paper over and over as many times as you wish, say 30 times, what would you imagine the thickness of the paper would be then? Before you move on, I encourage you to actually think about a possible answer to this question. Okay, after we have folded the paper once, it is now 2,000ths of a centimeter in thickness. If we fold it in half once again, the paper would become 4,000ths of a centimeter. With every fold we make, the paper doubles in thickness. And if we continue to fold it again and again, always in half, we would confront the following situation after 10 folds. 2 to the power of 10, meaning that you multiply 2 by itself 10 times, is 1,024 thousandths of a centimeter.
You're doubling the fold, you're doubling the width of it with each fold, and you were starting at 0.00124 centimeters. So you multiply that, you get to there.
Get a thickness of 2 to the power of 17, which is 131 centimeters, and that equals just over 4 feet. If we were able to fold it 25 times, then we would get 2 to the power 25, which is 33,554 centimeters, just over 1,100 feet. That would make it almost as tall as the Empire State Building. It's worthwhile to stop here and reflect for a moment. Folding a paper in half, even a paper as fine as that of the Bible, 25 times would give us a paper almost a quarter of a mile. What do we learn? This type of growth is called exponential growth. And as you see, just by folding a paper, we can go very far, but very fast too. Summarizing, if we fold a paper 25 times, the thickness is almost a quarter of a mile. 30 times, the thickness reaches 6.5 miles, which is about the average height that planes fly. 40 times, the thickness is nearly 7,000 miles, or the average GPS satellite's orbit. 48 times, the thickness is way over 1 million miles. Now, if you think that the distance between the Earth and the Moon is less than 250,000 miles, then starting with a piece of Bible paper and folding it 45 times, we get to the Moon. And if we double it one more time, we get back to Earth.
And it's doubled. If you double it one more time, that puts you right back to Earth. Anyway, just to give you an idea of what exponential growth can do in a relatively short amount of time. So if you go back to the chart there, where did Joseph go? Because again, here's the tribe, and you look through here, and there's no Joseph, but there's Joseph here, because that was part of the birth order. Joseph was the second to last, and with Benjamin being the very last, but he was there. So where did he go? Well, he didn't go anywhere. He was replaced in a way. If you go to Genesis 48, verses 5 through 6, Israel, Jacob is talking to Joseph, and he says to Joseph, "Now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simeon are. but your offspring that have been born after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the names of the brothers in their inheritance. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he will also be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." He blessed them that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So, in other words, interesting little, the coming full circle, or the apple doesn't fall far from the tree sort of thing, is that Manasseh was the firstborn, but Jacob gave the primary blessing to Ephraim. So, just as Jacob had received the primary blessing over Esau, and also, Joseph was the one who's one of the younger brothers. He was one who ruled over all his older brothers, and so that's where Joseph went. Is basically at that point in time when Joseph came to Egypt, Israel said, "You know what? I'm going to adopt these two," and he actually was prophesying at that point in time. And it's interesting because if you look back at that chart and you go back to where Ephraim and Manasseh are, Ephraim actually has more number, and Ephraim is the second born, Manasseh is the firstborn. Ephraim has a higher number at that point in time than Manasseh does. And also, interestingly, I'm not sure what the significance of this is, but just I took note of it, was that the last three tribes are all tribes from it's Benjamin and Joseph. The last two, just like Joseph. Ephraim, if he represents Joseph, being just ahead of Benjamin. But then the second part of Joseph, if you will, underneath Benjamin. Again, not sure the significance, but it was interesting. And then lastly, what about Levi? Where did Levi go in that part? Because here's the Bible census part, and there's Levi, but Levi's nowhere to be found. Well, we will deal with Levi later. He holds a special place in all of this. And that's where we are going to stop for today. We're going to stop at that first part, and we'll close in just a word of prayer here. And Lord, we thank you for your word, and we thank you as we dig into this that there are not just interesting things, but things that are valuable and lessons to be learned. And so we thank you for that, and we pray that you would just bless us for being in your word, Lord, and we thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Actually, one other thing I want to share with you here before we finish totally is, and I guess I can't hear. The last thing I wanted to mention too was in our conclusion, and the takeaways. This whole lesson was supposed to go through this entire outline, all three parts, but we only got through the first part, and that's okay. We'll continue with the second part next week. We're not going to do live stream. I am going to do a recording. I talked with Pastor about that, and we decided it's probably better that I just do a recording. So we'll do that. But in any case, number one, God is a God of order, and that's throughout the entire section. Number two, if God says to do something, the best thing we can do is obey. And I think that's just kind of common sense. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I love you, and we'll be praying for you, and we'll hopefully we'll be premiering this next section, which will be chapter 2, and we'll be doing that on Wednesday at 6 o'clock. Again, not live, but feel free to ask me any questions or email me questions if you have them. So thanks a lot for watching this, and hopefully this was a little bit less choppy than the Facebook one, and we'll see you next time. Love you guys.